All right, we got the world famous payment geek Ryan Lee. Ryan, let's just kick it off with Nautical Commerce. You're building this SaaS payment marketplace. What are you up to?
Yeah, we built Nautical Commerce because marketplace technology has been out of reach. It's really not very accessible. And, at the end of the day, after probably spending 5 to 7 years at the intersection of commerce, fintech, and logistics, I realized that, this specialized skill set could be applied by, really productizing the tech and the expertise. And so we did that and built Nautical Commerce around, the idea of being able to stand up a marketplace as easy as you can stand up a commerce store with, one of the players like BigCommerce or Shopify.
All right. Stand up a marketplace as easy as Shopify. So a marketplace presumably being, hey, I want to connect. Obviously, the drivers comes to mind with Uber and Lyft being big marketplaces. What would be examples of marketplaces that either currently do or could foreseeably in the near term operate on Nautical?
I'm glad you brought up Uber because, it's interesting. Most people, when you think marketplace, they immediately kind of default to Amazon. But at a fundamental level, the transaction and, the operational mechanics are the exact same, regardless of whether it's Uber, Airbnb, Amazon, Convoy, which is a freight marketplace, or even Apple's app store. Effectively what you do is you're bringing on a vendor. They've got to be able to be vetted. You've got to be able to allow them to list their products or services. And then ultimately, be able to match, buyers with the sellers, settle that transaction, and ultimately pay out your providers. And so, what we've done is we've built the engine that can power all of these marketplaces, believe it or not, because, again, the transaction's fundamentally the same. Where it's different are the nuances in how you handle the delivery of that, right? It's the mechanism by which the buyer comes in and purchase it, right? In the Uber case, they do it through an app, right? But on the Amazon case, generally they're doing it through the web or, a app that's really just a, veneer for the web. And so it's really where the uniqueness comes in is the buying experience, not the operations. The operations, which is, I like to say every marketplace is kind of like tip of the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is the buying experience. That's the unique part. The rest of it, everything that lives underneath that part is more or less the same across all marketplaces.
Ooh, interesting. So, okay, where do I want to take this? Are there what would be types of companies, or if you can name them, the exact company that is operating on Nautical today?
Yeah, so we have a couple of different companies that come to mind. Right. One of them is a freight marketplace, very similar to Convoy, just very specific and focusing on a very specific niche. They're matching carriers with shippers and facilitating a transaction that more or less, expedites, what you would normally call brokerage type freight. We also have another multi-brand customer that what they've done is they've seen the power of Nautical, and they have 3 or 4 unique brands. And what they've done is they have individual websites for each one of these brands, and they centralize all of the order management in the Nautical backend. And again, it functions somewhat similar to a marketplace because each one of these brands acts as a seller or a retailer.
Interesting. So when you started this business, which is not that old, right? You've been only at it a few years, 2 years? Does that sound
2
right?
years,
Yeah. Was there a realization that you had at that point that technology, because if you rewind the clock a little bit, marketplaces aren't that, they are old and they're not old at the same time. I feel like the Web 2.0 marketplace catalyzed by Uber, Airbnb, Lyft, these big name brand companies at this point, I think of their core value proposition is really the technology stack that they built. The Airbnb experience is super customized to the Airbnb, desires of the buyers and sellers, the hosts and the guests. Same thing for Uber, and the overlap. If I'm laying over Airbnb and Uber, obviously you can pick many different examples, but they feel quite a bit different. There's certainly a credit card that gets charged and a payment that gets sent. But if you go one level below that, then it's, hey, I want to make a reservation, and the reservation can look different. How far do you go down the stack of desires of, say, buyers and sellers, guests and hosts, drivers and passengers, where you're like, this is just too different? Where I can make a request for a reservation or a request to book. Then in the case of Airbnb, there has to be a feature to confirm that. The host sometimes has the ability to say no or yes based on their desire. Where in the case of Uber, I guess they do. They say, okay, I accept that request, and then they deliver on it so that they drive there. Tell me how you sort of parse out where the levels of abstraction across different marketplaces are just untenable to build from a technology standpoint.
No, Mike, I'm smiling because I could see you having that epiphany that I had about 2 years ago when we first started this. To be candid, when we built this, we were building a product marketplace platform, right? Mm-hmm. So, imagine, like maybe a Shopify of marketplaces where you could, click to deploy a platform near instantly and go from there. And just, by way of background, the reason why this came up is, from 2016 on, shortly after my stint at Apple, I met with, many of the Fortune 500, and they were all talking about the same problem. They were building marketplaces, but these were 2 to 3 year projects and $15 to $20 million spends, these capital projects that many of them ended in tears. And I was being brought in because of my expertise in payments. And so, you asked a very interesting question about, the uniqueness of each marketplace. Really, it comes down to, is it a durable asset that's being sold, which means it's reused by the, buyers in the marketplace. And, let's think Airbnb, a room, a car in Uber for drivers and riders, right? Or is it something that gets sent to them, like in an Amazon situation where it's a product, I buy it, maybe it's an Xbox or a PlayStation, it gets sent to me. Nobody else gets to use that because I earn it. Fundamentally, though, all of them have, to an extent, logistics. All of them have payments. All of them have an order. And there's a commission ascribed to it. The sellers are generally under some level of service level commitment that is in their contract. Every seller on the platform is under some kind of contract with the marketplace, which functions as merchant of record in Payment Geek's terms. And so, think about Uber, your reservation time, like versus like an Airbnb, is much smaller, right? You might have the car for 15 minutes. But that car can't be occupied technically by another rider unless you're doing the shared rides, right? But technically, right, it's being used. It cannot be oversubscribed by many riders. A room at Airbnb, let's hope, doesn't get double booked, right? And in that case, you have it for a block of time. Again, these are just durable assets. In a freight marketplace, the carrier and the truck, the driver, right, generally cannot be double booked. And I say that in full truckload, not necessarily less than truckload, but I say that because it's very similar to Uber. It's very similar to Airbnb. And let's think about the app stores, right? Apple's App Store, Google's Play, and Amazon's developer marketplace. You've got to onboard a developer. You've got to localize the app in the language of the buyer, right? It needs to be offered in every country. You have to apply taxes. You have to do the payment. You capture it. There's order, and then ultimately the commission payout. It's the exact same across every marketplace. The only thing that differs, technically, is really the buying experience, and whether or not it's a durable good, a service. A service is really just a person. Generally, you're getting someone's time, and a lot of times they can't be double booked for the same amount of time, right?
All right, I'm with you so far. It does. I still have this like splinter in my mind where I'm thinking one of two things has to be true: that the product is not. This is not like picking on nautical. It's just
No,
the
absolutely.
concept of it. Like a marketplace as a service product has to. It's like a launch ramp. Like you use it to get off the ground, you can quickly go, you get product market fit. And then because you're in some vertical with some specific need, there's going to be a point at which you're like, oh, these guys just don't have what I need to continue my development, because you're building effectively horizontally. You're satisfying as many possible problems that marketplace founders would have when they start. And so you either say as Nautical, hey, we're going to be a launch ramp. We're going to make signing up and transitioning off as easy as possible. Or you say, we're just going to pick a few verticals and make and build out as many features as possible, with the presumption that, 5-10 years from now, we'll have tons and tons of features for as many different marketplaces potential as possible. Does that resonate with you, or am I missing something?
Oh, 100%. The interesting part was we didn't realize the versatility of the platform until we were approached by a couple of these marketplaces that said, hey, can you power our app store? There was a marquee Silicon Valley app store that I think many people on this podcast have used, that came to us and needed us to help them, right? They had 18 different platforms running their current marketplace. And when they looked at what I call nautical engine, they realized that, they could probably get that down to maybe 3 systems with nautical powering the majority of it. So I want to step back and elevate to maybe a 20,000
Mm-hmm.
foot view. You know, I agree with you directionally that there absolutely would have to be some customization and some unique pieces. But we took more of an ERP approach to the way we built the platform. And so if you think about it, ERPs are pretty generic. I mean, there's a distributor who sells flooring that's using the exact same ERP that a software company in Silicon Valley is using. And it works, right? Because they're able to plug in custom fields and they're able to get it to do what they need it to do. They don't go to them and say, oh, I can't use your ERP because you don't help Silicon Valley companies, right? I mean, I know NetSuite customers that go the gambit. And the interesting finding that we had was that marketplaces, the transaction is fundamentally the same. You have to do KYV and compliance checks on your vendors in order to do payouts. And that, again, is an order of magnitude more difficult. This is the fintech part. What we like to say, and Mike, I think you run both a marketplace and maybe even a commerce store, but in commerce, it's relatively easy. You just have to accept payments. You have to have a bank account. You get the deposits, right? Marketplace is an order of magnitude more difficult because if you're paying someone out, you have to issue a payout, and you have to make sure you're not paying someone who is on a sanctioned entity list. You have to make sure you're issuing tax forms now for them. You have to withhold taxes now with the governments, coming in and saying, Amazon's too big, and we've now forced marketplace operators to own that responsibility to make the IRS whole. And so, this is the fintech component of a marketplace. And so how is commerce different from a marketplace is we like to say, commerce is just 1/3 of what a marketplace is. A marketplace really is at the intersection of commerce, fintech, and logistics. And the fintech part includes compliance, right? It includes the payout, component. And if you're really sophisticated, like most of these marketplaces, they actually embed what you'd call a payment orchestration layer. And I can totally geek out there. But, if you think about it, the back end, the back office operations of a marketplace are fundamentally the same. It's the buying experience that differs. And it's delivery of the good, whether it's a service, whether it's a durable good or a room, whether it's a doctor's office visit, and you're matching, providers or even freelancers like Fiverr, or, it's an app store and you're delivering it. That's where the nuance comes in, right? It's the buying experience and the delivery of the good.
All right.
But the back office is the same.
So what's the when you look at this business model? We'll just like broadly describe it as that. What's the daunting part? And a little bit of context. I I have these memories, not so fond memories, of building my first startup, which was a point of sale system in 2013. And we were specifically catering to small and mid-sized apparel stores that had multiple locations. So it's pretty specific. And we would build out features for them because roughly they had the same amount of SKUs. You know, they had variations in the SKUs, small, medium, large, maybe blue, red, purple for different colors of shirts and things. And the product itself, the innovation was that it was on an iPad and web-based, so you could bring it to multiple locations, kind of like what Square is today. And in our minds, we're like, oh, well, the back office functionality is all the same. There's just SKUs, reconciliations, payments, customers, and you could bolt on emails and all that sort of stuff. But today, even so, the point of sale software market remains super fragmented because if you're a bike shop or if you're a convenience store or a grocery store, an apparel store or sunglasses shop, you have such different needs in handling returns and handling variations of SKUs and handling lost items or all these things. And I'm thinking, okay, why couldn't you do this same approach for point of sale? Is there maybe a technology innovation that sort of happened in Web 2 that makes it possible to do today that wasn't possible then? Do you taking the example of the point of sale space? Do you see the parallel there where you're like, oh yeah, of course, there's an opportunity to do it, or do you see it being fundamentally different between point of sale software and marketplaces?
Yeah, I think point of sale is a little more difficult. Actually, I would say a lot more difficult. We're pure play software, right? Whereas point of sale, you have to integrate some level of hardware, right? And when you're a marketplace and you're online, you get the advantage of card not present type providers and stuff, and they're fairly, straightforward to integrate. In your case, you have to integrate, hardware, and maybe you were capturing the payments directly and you had some hardware device or a reader. That creates a level of complexity. It's interesting. The back office, you're not wrong that the back office is the same. It isn't that their process is exactly the same, right? How they resolve those functions, whether it's a return, what their policies are, whether it's 30 days, 45 days, no return, final sell, all that good stuff, that can change, right? That from a tech perspective, the technology should enable that, but it's not exactly analogous, just because of the nuances of dealing with card present transactions versus card not present. So I definitely don't envy the environment you were in. However, I will say you're right about the back office. It's the same as long as the system exposes the flexibility for people to model the process through different workflows, right? Because at the end of the day, software really is just a workflow engine. It's a state machine. And what it does, it puts things in different states. Let's take a return flow, right? In most commerce, when there's a return, you have to request an authorization before sending it back. You can't just send something to a guy and call him and say, "Hey, I just returned your stuff. Refund my money." Like, I don't know how to track this. Where'd you send it? That creates a problem. So think about returns. It's a perfect state machine, right? What you do is you have a return authorization that you get some code or confirmation or even a label to slap on a box to return a pair of shoes, let's say. Once it's received in the actual warehouse, they scan it and that updates the state, right? It says the return is received. And then that effectively triggers downstream processes, which could be refunds. It could be, taking out a fee for reshelving, application of the policies that you create. And so what we knew that the flows had to go through this workflow engine, and it had to be flexible enough for people to be able to inject custom workflows in. But at the same time, they need to be insulated around, let's say, a rules engine. I know I might be getting a little bit geeky here, but where those rules can be applied and create automations so that we can get past what I'm effectively calling the manual entry problem, right, and the manual reconciliation problem. And as long as the system facilitates that, in my mind, it's quite flexible and agile. Now, again, not all systems do that, but a return, with that kind of flexibility where you can kind of create your own adventure as a retailer, is quite flexible.
Yeah. I want to pry your brain a little bit more on marketplaces. I'd say is the category of marketplaces has been a pretty exciting space for investors because and founders because once you hit marketplace traction and you get to scale some percentage lead over the others in the space, it kind of just snowballs, and then you become the obvious place, and then there's barriers to entry, and then it's difficult for other people to compete. You're like a local monopoly on whatever you're providing. Yep. And that carries with it, by contrast, say if you compare it to like pure SaaS companies, if most SaaS companies, if they had 1 million customers, that would be no more valuable to me in theory than if they had 5. So the marketplaces have more to offer as they have more buyers and more sellers. It's where everything's happening. It's kind of the same reason why people cluster together in cities. It's like there's just more electricity. Do you feel like we are, if you were to track marketplace funding or opportunity, do you feel as the web has been around now, say modern technology, I think of like, fast mobile, fast web, at least in the US for a good 10 or 12, 15 years. I'm not talking about like early days Amazon where it was like dial up, but you have high speed, you trust the internet to do transactions, you throw in your credit card, no problem. Do you feel like we're accelerating or slowing or flatlining on marketplaces, on the number of companies founded, raising money, selling? What's your gut there?
Right. Yeah, great question. I think there's three fundamental challenges with the marketplace, right? Because the tech has been so inaccessible it's unapproachable. It costs a lot of money to launch a marketplace, several years and several $1 million, even for the littlest ones. You've got to have sophistication as a tech company to actually build a marketplace right now. This is pre-Nautical, right? Then once you build your tech, then you have to operate it. I think a lot of folks, the misnomer around marketplace is the IP around building the marketplace is valuable. I would argue it's commoditized because if you can't operate, it's completely worthless. If you have the greatest tech in the world, but you can't figure out how to monetize it or commercialize it or even go to market, it's not worth anything. A marketplace thrives on its network. You've got to be able to get buyers. You've got to curate the right sellers. You've got to offer the right products or services. And so, what I would say is I'm seeing a lot of, marketplace activity, especially among brands that you just wouldn't expect, right? I think in 2019, I met with probably 30 of the Fortune 500, talking to them about marketplaces and their problems, especially around payments specifically, and fintech. And the interesting part was that every one of them was building a marketplace because they were doing what Apple did really well. They were doing what Google did really well, right? Apple and Google monetized their ecosystem. They monetized their core product by insulating it with, a bunch of sellers that were going to help them. Whether, if you look at the iPhone, right? There's this program called Made for iPhone, where folks can create wallets, that bolt on, or cases that actually snap to the actual iPhone, right? That's a marketplace. They're building out an ecosystem. Now, we're seeing car companies go in and say, wow, wait a minute, these third-party parts, let's say Brembo brakes for a specific car, are being sold on Part ID, a marketplace. But let's say it's intended for a Porsche. Porsche makes nothing. They don't have a marketplace right now. If they may have a marketplace, instead of selling $20,000 Porsche ceramic brakes, they could maybe sell $10,000 Brembo brakes. Maybe they won't make, the entire commission off that, but they'll make 10%, right? And so monetizing what I call post-purchase monetization is a theme right now. Re-commerce is a theme.
Do you think I've heard somebody articulate a convincing argument, which I'm not convinced of it, but that we're sort of converging at a number of marketplaces that can exist because the ideas of things that you would want is fixed. And I don't subscribe to that entirely because, kind of to your point, there's almost, I don't want to say limitless, but like Porsche you wouldn't think of as a marketplace provider, but to your point,
No.
they could create a marketplace of like things that bolt on to the Porsche. Like you could, like, just like your exact analogy or example to the iPhone. That wouldn't, to me, that's not an intuitive idea where you're like, oh, this is a group of buyers and a group of sellers that are struggling to connect. That's the classic way to identify a marketplace. They're finding each other on Craigslist. And there's a great post out there that they take a picture of Craigslist snapshot and they'll show, every line is a marketplace.
Bundling.
Right. So it's giant unbundling that happens. And so you have all these companies that are out there that are sizable companies in each category of Craigslist, the ultimate marketplace, like the godfather of all of us, and that Uncle Craig. And then you have the growth of those companies. But then it's like, okay, what happens next? It's like a splintering of that. I can see each one of those marketplaces can be split up. Buy and sell cars, for instance. That was a category in Craigslist. Now there's 5, 6, 7 like sizable marketplaces there. And then, okay, what do you do next? Well, you sub filter that into buy and sell Jeeps, and there's a marketplace just for Jeeps. And then there'll be like I was talking to a guy that was literally building last week. He's funding a company that is building that is allowing people to trade exotic off-road vehicles, like big Jeeps, classic Jeeps, and
Absolutely.
that's the only you go just for that. And it's like, maybe is that how it goes? It just keeps splitting into more and more marketplaces.
I think it's even crazier than that. And what I would opine is that it's going to be kind of Web 3.0, right? Web 2.0 is this unbundling concept where it's like, oh, there's this niche thing on Craigslist. It could be done better with someone being very purpose-built marketplace that just aggregates this demand out of nowhere, right? Like the Uber effect. I believe in Web 3.0, right? It is mesh commerce, right? And so it's you having a storefront and maybe Gap having a storefront, or maybe another brand like Nike having a storefront, and maybe syndicating catalogs across all of these platforms so that we get the benefit of increasing our average order value, right? And so you cross-listing stuff on different other people's commerce systems, not just marketplaces. Because right now the idea is you run a storefront, you just list on Amazon or Walmart or Best Buy's marketplace, right? I think the future is you have a storefront, but it's discoverable by other storefronts, and this is the way we built Nautical, so that, you can actually sell my goods, which is also on a Nautical storefront. And it's effectively cross-pollination, and you might make a commission almost like an influencer, right? Where instead of getting like traditional marketplace commission of like 10 to 15%, you might get 2 to 3%. But guess what? You didn't have to facilitate the transaction. You may have collected the goods or actually collected the payment, but the disbursement goes to that other storefront, if that makes sense. So I
Yeah.
think that's the future. I think, but that's probably a couple years out, maybe 5 plus. To your point, I think there's so much more to be done in post-purchase monetization, especially for a lot of these marquee brands. I think Nike missed out on a real opportunity with reselling their shoes. There's a whole cottage industry, StockX and other marketplaces that just sell, these vintage shoes and or coveted shoes that were maybe limited production or just loved by their users. I know there's one particular brand or one particular model or whatever you call it that I love from like 2 or 3 years ago that I can't get. If I see a pair, I'll pay a couple hundred extra for them, which is nuts for me to even say that. If you knew me as a fintech guy, that's just crazy. But this exists, and to your point, you're getting these curated, very interesting marketplaces. But I do think that there's so much more that brands can do that they're just not taking advantage of. If you think about the biggest of the big, the $1 trillion companies right now, Every single one of them did not start out as a marketplace. Amazon did not start out as a marketplace, right? Amazon started as a bookstore. And then what they wanted to do is say, well, let's see if we could get 3 million books. Well, they had to aggregate up a bunch of distributors or, of these books, publishers. And Bezos was just not satisfied with the SLA on shipping. And he said, we got to get it there in 2 days. So he started building warehouses and productizing logistics. And that's how he became a marketplace. Amazon anyway, was a journey to get there. It wasn't just overnight. He said, oh, I want to be a marketplace. That really wasn't the thing. You think about Apple. Apple was a computer company. It's most notably known for having 20 million developers, lay developers that they're paying in their ecosystem because they're building apps, right? For this massive machine that was built around the iOS ecosystem, and so these are companies that have set the standard, the model for the future of not only commerce but, in my mind, the economy, right? And marketplaces are going to change the economy in a very fundamental way, and it takes a while for others to catch up.
Do you feel like a good definition, or feel free to add on to it or take away, but a marketplace as opposed to a merchant would be that a marketplace doesn't produce or their services that they're offering. This is the debate now with YouTube and Spotify is like, are we the producer or publisher, I think is the word that gets thrown around, or are we or the producer? I think publisher versus producer, right? Are we making the podcast, the music, the service, or are we just a platform, a marketplace, so to speak, where the service or the product can pass through? And ultimately, it seems to me that the one important question to ask when figuring this answer out is, does the marketplace or the platform have the ability to take down items that are for sale or take down merchants entirely? Like Nautical, you could shut down one of your merchants. Say one of your merchants was selling, something that was caught up in the social news. And it's like, hey, Ryan, like you got, racist, you got porn smuggling terrorists on your platform, and it's and this marketplace is there, and you're like, bam, shut them down. You have the ability to do that. So that would put you in a position to be it would lean towards being a publisher in that sense. So you're not a moderator, right? And
yeah,
do you see this as a gray scale, or do you see it as pretty black and white, the difference between publishing and producing?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I'll use a secondary analogy as well, right? When we walked in the malls of the 1990s and 2000s, right? The mall itself didn't sell anything. They sold real estate, and then each storefront was a tenant in there, right? And they sold stuff. Now, if the tenants sold stuff that were, let's just say violated the law or, whatever, they didn't pay their bill, they'd get kicked out. They'd get evicted. Now, let's take Simon Malls, for example. You would think Simon Malls doesn't really sell anything, but they actually do, right? They actually set up their own kiosk and they sell gift cards to be used in the mall. So technically they are selling something that can then be used within their own ecosystem, which of course boosts, their ecosystem. Amazon's done the same, right? Amazon is more or less a real estate, like a mall, and they have a bunch of sellers. And then on occasion, Amazon says, oh yeah, we're going to build this device and we're going to sell it on our own mall. So, the interesting part is, I think we're in a blended world. I don't think there's pure play moderators or, publishers versus distributors versus, content agnostic type plays, because I think everybody kind of dog foods their own stuff. I mean, heck, even Reddit posts on their own board, right? Netflix is producing their own content now. And so, it's interesting. And I would even argue that Netflix is to an extent a marketplace, right? They go out and get content, they bring in the buyers, and effectively you have both, they're monetizing both sides of the equation, if that makes sense. Maybe that's not an answer, but I think it's gray area now. And I think it's incumbent on the platform to make sure that it resonates with the audience, and I would say that, lately Facebook's run afoul of this, right? it's been a great platform in many ways where it's connected people and it's brought a lot of people back together, or it's a way to share photos and updates about what's going on. But now it's become this trove of political ideology, and a lot of divisiveness stuff has been flooding on the platform. And so they're at a seminal moment where they have to decide, is this stuff that we need to start filtering because it doesn't align with the marketplace we created, right? We created a social network that connects people in a way that makes the world a better place. And if there's stuff on there that's creating divisiveness and hate and ugliness, they have to make a decision. Do they want that and just let it Wild West and be a free form, platform? Or are they going to get a little bit more heavy handed and say, no, we want to create this curated experience for our customers, the end users. And I think that's every marketplace's and even social networks decision, right? About what they want to deliver to their customers
I
or to evolve.
I don't even think I mean this is maybe a contrarian viewpoint on this, but I don't even think they have a choice to some degree. I think that the option to be completely Wild West, like libertarians, say whatever you want, trade whatever you want. I don't think that that's an option because here's what happens is that there's a certain number of people who take advantage of that. And even if you try to, as a platform, say, no, it's only going to be doxing or releasing private information, or it's going to be like threats of physical violence, even if you try to take that hard line constitutional stance, it slips. It slips because you introduce these edge cases where it's like, okay, what if another government wants to come in and buy ads for a political campaign? Which is how that was to me. That's where the point was entered in. Like that was the leverage point. That was like, oh, Facebook needs a shitload more moderation. And then it's like once that dam was broken, then it's like, well, this person said mean things to me on Facebook. Let's cancel him, right? Like why not
Exactly.
continue
Where
the
does it
right?
stop?
Yeah, and so anybody who's mean, and it's not even now, it's not even mean. It's just anybody who doesn't believe what I believe, and so we're at that point today, very much so. And I think that's not a Facebook thing. It's like a Twitter, Facebook, it's social media culture of the West thing, and it kind of slides into what do we deem as appropriate to trade in terms of we're trading ideas, right? Like I'm selling you an idea when I'm putting it on Twitter, and then you're either rejecting it or you're buying it, and people want to sell ideas. That's that point to getting attention. In a way that right, they are marketplaces in that idea. I don't think most people appreciate the like cognitive complexity of trading ideas and the meme world that's going on, but there's a lot who do, and those people who do get it, they form specific organizations or companies with specific objectives to release memes into the atmosphere, because what we believe in our minds ends up trickling down into reality. And that's not, I don't think Facebook can opt out of that. I don't think there's a line to say, do whatever you want here, because the people, because here's what will happen. If there was a place like say whatever you want, do whatever you want, then there would be extremes that would happen and people would just leave. And they would look for another place that was a little bit more guarded. And it's like this game we play, it's like a human pendulum swinging back and forth. But I find it fascinating to think about it like a marketplace of ideas. And yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'll respectfully disagree in one area specifically, and actually bring it back to the fact that we're on a fintech podcast, or at least fintech focused. Is at the end of the day, what you end up monetizing and what you end up allowing to be sold on that marketplace. And I'm not talking about the ideas. I'm talking about purchasing, right? So if you allow people to buy ads that are maybe divisive or maybe hateful or could run afoul of maybe what you stand for morally and or ethically, then you are allowing that, and you do have control over that. Now I agree that you don't necessarily have control over free form content, but you absolutely have control over what ads you allow people to buy. And Google's exercised that authority recently, right? Is they've effectively wholesale banned organizations from advertising certain products that are either deemed illegal or morally questionable or even gray area. And they've kind of taken a stance on that. Is that good or bad? Well, that's their decision,
Let me
not necessarily ours.
let me ask you this: what do you think are the likely repercussions of a company like Google or Facebook or Twitter banning ads that are opposed to their incentives? So Google doesn't want, say, a competitor to come on and advertise. They don't want people who believe in complete free speech to come on and advertise, because then they're going to be incentivized to there's a clashing of fundamental viewpoints. Like Google spends a lot, these companies spend a lot on lobbying politicians, and that is effective in accomplishing the type of regulatory environment that they thrive in. Just since you're a two-person company, every founder is like, get a barrier to entry. And as you grow, the barrier to entry just becomes like spending money on lobbying and influencing policy and changing regulations. Mm-hmm. Do you see a predictable or foreseeable reaction to these companies canceling people who they disagree with at a deeper level, or preventing advertisers that are trying to advertise on their platforms? I mean, for example, I think this is common knowledge, or at least publicly acceptable, that they're pretty Google and Facebook. At least they've been what's the word? Accused. They've been accused of like de-ranking organizations who lean right. And that is probably a function of either the conscious or unconscious bias of the people who work in those companies. But it is kind of interesting to think about, like, what comes next?
Well, you make a great point. And, it's interesting because, back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, they called these companies utilities. Because they had become so big and they dominated so much of the public infrastructure that the government needed to regulate them. And again, as a techie, I hate throwing government regulation around, but at the end of the day, if you have a 70, 80, 90% monopoly on a certain segment and you're controlling the narrative and things like that, you absolutely need some level of oversight where you're not controlling the message that is favorable to you. Because, I mean, that's like a utility company saying, well, every year I can jack you up $10 a month or $100 a month or whatever the story is, because there's no options. You can't go anywhere. And in that case, I do think that there's an anti-competitive, issue. It is interesting, though, because what they choose to monetize at the end of the day, again, it's always follow the money. What they choose to monetize is really where you see their values lie. And some people pay a lot of money to try to get you to flex on your policies and everything else. And I think we saw that. We saw that over the last couple of years, where there's been a public argument around what is moral and what is ethical when it comes to controlling that narrative. Totally.
Yeah. Last point I want to add on this is I think they are these organizations. You can't look at them as like groups of people. They're their own intelligence. As the CEO could leave, the entire exec team could leave. You come in, and then the thing is going to act to preserve itself. Like the Google entity,
absolutely,
the corporate entity, name the company, and they're selling products to the public. And the public wants different things at different points in time. So it's not just always better, faster, cheaper. Sometimes, like right now, more inclusive. And so that product of inclusivity and diversity is a product that's being offered. So it's topical. So I'll bring it up. When Spotify said that they're going to keep Joe Rogan on, they said that we're going to also give $100 million to diverse speakers, podcasters, and that kind of thing. So, but I think that Spotify didn't do that out of the goodness of their heart. They said they ran the internal algorithm and said, hey, what is going to preserve Spotify the longest and help us flourish? And actually that decision to allocate resources to that group of people represents it allows their customers to become more dedicated to like buy the next subscription. Like ultimately they believe, it may or may not be true, it probably is true, that it's going to boost the monthly subscription, like more revenue, follow the money, to your point. So
Absolutely.
I find it interesting how it's like, that's not obvious. It's not obvious spending $100 million on, not the biggest podcasts that are out there, not the fastest growing podcasts. So it's like, society's a weird thing, man.
I mean, it's the economic engine, right?
Yeah.
Businesses want to preserve their flow of cash, right? And in the Spotify case, obviously they're making a good amount of money from advertisers and everything else. And there's no shortage of let's just say radio style talk show hosts that have been controversial in the past. I mean, let's think about Howard Stern and some others. That really are very popular among a good segment of people. And so the interesting part about our society, especially like the podcast forums, is people can tune in and listen to things that they want to hear. And obviously they both have an audience. Both of these gentlemen have an audience, and it's obviously quite profitable for organizations like Spotify. I think it was really risk mitigation for them to channel this 100 million or whatever that number was into all of these podcasts, because what they're saying is, hey, we're not taking sides. What we're saying is, if you're offended by, the fact that they've been wildly successful, fine, we'll start propping up others and see if they can also achieve the same level of success. It's a very, impartial, agnostic kind of approach that may placate, the other side that's kind of griping and saying, hey, I don't like the message. It doesn't resonate with me. But I mean, I think that's,
Well,
maybe it's a uniquely U.S. issue.
Well, here would be
freedom of speech.
I feel like this would be the hardest thing for executives at these kind of companies to tread through, which is that, say I'm a Joe Rogan hater. I say he's a terrible person on Twitter. I bash him everywhere, and then I go and listen to him, and I listen to everything he says, and I like everything, but I'm denouncing him. So I'm giving my attention, i.e., my money, to Joe Rogan through Spotify, yet I'm saying ban him. And I think that's kind of it's like mass media. It's like we hate mass media, but so many people tune in, still watch it. And it's it's kind of a catch-22 in that sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. I think about like, where is there a direction that things I like to look at things from, like, layer over this perspective of, you have the view of companies competing, and you have this referee with the government in place, and then we debate what the rules the referee should be allowed to do, and then you have like the people who are really here's one thing I'm thinking about. I'm curious to hear your reaction to it. I think one thing that'll become in the collective consciousness much more so in the next 5 to 10 years is psychology, how the mind works, not the brain. Like, it's not a neural scientific perspective of fMRIs and detect. It's like, and also I think I started to hear podcasters on Twitter talk more about philosophers and cognitive scientists. Like Carl Jung seems to be like bubbling up, where it's like, what is this collective subconscious that's going on? Because that is ultimately understanding that and this is Jordan Peterson's rise to prominence, like a rocket ship, is like, there's a huge need that we as a populace to understand what is going on in our minds as we become fucking gods on earth, creating bombs and rocket ships and stuff. So, I think that'll become really big.
You're spot on, Mike. Psychology, I think, is still a frontier that we're exploring. I mean, just as the human condition. And the interesting thing is that we were just talking about ad networks, right? Marketplaces that are ad networks, but ads are a psychological manipulation. As babies, we are let's just say innately wired to manipulate our parents to get their attention, right? So we get more of whatever we need, sustenance or whatever. And so the interesting part is it becomes that fine line of what's ethical manipulation and what is not, right?
Mm.
And we don't want to rabbit hole this too much, but there is a arm of psychology called NLP. You might want to look into it. It's called neuro linguistic programming, and it's very interesting because a lot of organizations and even people have used this to effectively steer people into their causes. A con artist is an excellent master, a wizard's ball master at NLP, and the idea is getting someone to do something they probably wouldn't normally do through these tactics that may seem at the surface level quite benign, but in reality the outcome is quite disastrous or unethical. Let's just say.
I think there's two elements adding on to that. One is getting people to do something that they wouldn't otherwise do in a conscious, sedated, conscious mind, like a relaxed conversational mind that we're in now. And then two is if the person doing it, if the con artist is covering up their act, so they're playing dumb. Oh, I'm not doing anything. What are you talking about? And then the other is that the thing that they're getting the person to do, the ad that they're getting them to click on, is bad for them, and the con artist knows that. So it's like that's what like triggers hate. If somebody is selling candy to a baby, porn to an addict, drugs to an addict, like we recognize that's malicious, and that like there's something inside our brains that's like, you can't. What are you doing? You're making behavior. The world a worse place.
Yeah, we just call that bad behavior, right? And by the way, I don't want to villainize NLP. NLP in its
right. No, that's clear.
Again, there's always a good side and a bad side, right?
Totally.
Let's call it the dark side and the good side. But NLP, if used appropriately and it benefits the person, can be quite powerful to get messages across. I mean, heck,
totally.
The best presenters in the world, use NLP in a way that gets buy-in. Right, for projects, for their causes. Politicians use it, to an extent, right? But then there's again the bad actors who also use it, and so again, we as higher level species, we have this moral conundrum where we have to act, with respect to an ethical construct, right? The social contract that we've created with society. And, again, to your point, you're judging them and saying, hey, that's bad behavior or it's not bad behavior, right? To me, it's really about, understanding that we have this gift of fire, whether it's psychology as our tool set, whether it's technology as our skill set, whether it's speaking, is our skill set, or business or whatever that, your secret sauce is. We have to realize that we've been given that, and in the immortal words of I guess Uncle Ben in Spider-Man is with great power comes great responsibility, right? And what he meant by that was you have a moral and ethical obligation to your social contract that you've established with society, and you have to honor that, and that's what Uncle Ben was saying.
Yeah, and what happens is if you don't go down these rabbit holes and you don't explore the depths of the foundational or the substantial viewpoints that you have and like why we have, and really go down, and you're so far down this rabbit hole, you're like, what am I doing here? But then sometimes you hit bedrock and you're like, oh yeah, that's a philosophical line that I'm not going to cross. Then you can come all the way up the chain and you could say, okay, what's our KYC policy? Like Tuesday at 2 p.m. Are we gonna allow people to come in? Like, what do we feel about gambling? And it's like, I don't know, man. Like, what is gambling? Is gambling wrong? Like, let's go. Then you're like back down, and it's hard to make good. Here's how I'd say this: you don't have the ammunition or the tool set to make really challenging, abstract, important decisions, either in a company or a government, if you haven't thought carefully about what's really going on under the hood. Like gambling is a good one because that's a marketplace. In fact, there was a guy interviewed a couple weeks ago who's building a crypto marketing platform marketplace, and it's like, well, is that bad? Because it's certainly been labeled bad as society has made it illegal and only in Vegas and then not too much. Because you certainly see, like drugs, you see the pathway to a hellish life. Like I lose everything,
Yeah.
I gamble it all, I'm homeless and that kind of thing. And that's why it's so important. And I'm like, okay, sanctions. Countries aren't allowed to trade with each other. People are on this bad list. There's certain risk categories for different people. And KYC is interesting because that's where the rubber meets the road on some degrees, because companies have the freedom. They have it's not like black and white, because there's so many. You have to create this different tier.
It's very gray area.
This AML policy, and there's all these BS Bank Secrecy Act laws, and the U.S. after 9/11 has taken it's been an explosion of rules and regulations on tracking people, and I want to ask you: do you have particular areas within fintech that come to mind when you think of the fintech nerd inside? Is there like certain areas of fintech that you are particularly excited about?
I would say one I'm particularly proud about. I saw a stat the other day that 92% of all payments right now are being done by Apple Pay. So, all of my, I guess, alum that launched Apple Pay, back in my days at Apple, that's awesome to see it proliferate. I do think that there was a pandemic effect on it. People just not wanting to pull out their cards and dip it and do all this other stuff. But that's really cool to see.
Wait, is that
I love that.
92% of all in-person credit card payments are done through Apple Pay?
No. I believe it's 92% of all mobile payments are. It was I believe, a study by Discover Card. If you type up percentage of mobile payments by, I guess, mobile wallet. All the mobile wallets, Apple Pay is really dominating the space. And part of that is we as a team, Apple, we made security and trust the absolute most important thing. And from the provisioning all the way to execution of the transaction, that was very, very important to us. And privacy. We wanted to make sure that to an extent you were shielded from predatory tracking and those kinds of things. So
I'm so curious to get your thoughts on this. You were there. I think you were there in 2014 to 16.
I was.
You were there
through 16.
I think that was right after when Edward Snowden released all the classified documents and these big companies. I forget how Apple was involved, but I know that there was a lot with the Verizon and AT&T where they're pulling out metadata. Has there been any publicly released information that you're aware of about big tech companies having these backdoor access points that they can access? Or is it typically now, do you feel like we're at a point where the public knows what's going on inside these big tech companies, or do you still think there's a lot behind the scenes that people aren't aware of?
Yeah, to be candid, I mean, I wouldn't be able to say explicitly around Apple, but I can say this. Apple took a position, more or less a very unpopular one. I think right around 2015, there was a terrorist attack in LA. Two very bad actors killed a lot of people, and the law enforcement kind of postured and said they want Apple to come and unlock a phone. The challenge is, if you create a backdoor as a tech company, I hate to say this, but hackers are much more crafty than law enforcement.
Yeah.
They're usually about 3 to 5 years ahead of law enforcement. So if there's a backdoor, the hackers will find it way before law enforcement will be able to use it in a constructive way. And so, as much as, I was angry about, of course, the terrorist attack, and I wanted to see, the victims and their families get justice, I also was very concerned about the privacy implications of unlocking that phone or forcing a tech company to do that. And by the way, I don't even know if that was possible because, at that time, the way it was working was those encryption keys were actually on the phone. They weren't stored in the
Right.
cloud. They weren't stored anywhere else. They were actually on the phone. And so when you lock your phone with the keys and everything else and your PIN code, it's stored there. And that's probably one of the best security mechanisms in the world is it's not stored anywhere else. So, they can't unlock it.
Did Apple, how did that play out?
Well, the FBI, I think, hired a security firm, and eventually, somehow the security firm was able to unlock the phone. But it may have been because it was a weak password or those kinds of things. Again, I can't
Yeah.
speculate on how it happened, but that's what I would suspect
Mm.
happened. Is it was some security firm and completely independent
Yeah.
of any of the big
It
tech
wasn't
companies.
Apple, though. They
Um,
didn't come out and do it.
yeah,
Yeah. Mm.
yeah. I'm not sure if it was McAfee or some affiliated company like that that had helped them out. And when I say McAfee, not the security
Hmm.
company, but the actual gentleman at the time. I think he had a couple of different companies
That
that
guy's wild.
he had. So
I can't get that guy on it. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I give Apple credit, though. I mean, that's such they're unique, I think, in the big tech companies where they really do seem to be genuinely emphasizing it all the way down to their DNA, security and privacy. And I think it's like,
privacy is super important.
dude, like, I just agree, like there's going to be terrible people that do terrible things, but we also need a space that you can just, like the black box of your mind where you can just keep things and not have them be, surveyed or overlooked or taken at any point. I think it's probably
Well,
critical to sanity.
my thing was, I think Tim issued a note. He wrote a letter, an open letter to customers explaining why Apple had took the position back in 2015. It's still published. I mean, you can
Mm.
actually look at that letter. It's still on the Apple website. I think I pulled it up the other day for some odd reason. But uh, you know, this is the problem. It sounds great at the time to assist, an organization to actually unlock it. But what happens when a bad actor infiltrates, the government, or they overstep their bounds and they start going after innocent people? It's interesting. I think a very famous billionaire, I won't quote him because I can't exactly attribute the credit to him, is they said, if you tell someone for 2 weeks, if you put a tail on someone for 2 weeks by law enforcement, they'll arrest them for something. We have so many laws on the
Hmm.
books that are somewhat nonsensical that yes, you can get arrested for, I mean, heck, if law enforcement interviews you today and you say, yeah, this is what happened, and then a week later they come back and they interview you for the same thing, and you say, well, no, it wasn't a red car, it was a blue car. You just lied to them.
Mm.
In their mind, they could put you in jail for several years. The absurdity of that is just astronomical because the brain, the human memory doesn't remember things precisely. And yet, the way the law is written is if you say one thing and then 2 months later you say an exact opposite thing or it's slightly off, they can arrest you and put you in jail for that. And I'm sorry. I mean, if you ask me what color my socks are, I can't tell you without looking at them. Yeah, I put them on less than 8 hours ago,
Yeah.
right? Um, so, I think it's a slippery slope. Again, I don't want to empower bad folks. Um, but we also have to protect
Yeah, and I
civilians.
think that's so. I mean, I just feel like a safe company. If a company makes a safe, and you use the safe, and you lock up something, and then you go, do something terrible, it's not that you wouldn't point to the safe company and say, "Hey, get this open." You're just like, we sell safes. We don't sell master keys for everyone, and otherwise we'd be somebody break in and take all the keys and take all the safes. But yeah, interesting, man. I really appreciate you going down different rabbit holes. Congrats on all the progress. I really admire the mission with creating the marketplace platform as a service. I think it's fantastic and a huge market. You guys have raised a couple of million. Is there anything that you're looking for that's top of mind for you guys now? Are you writing? Are you online? Mention if you are.
Yeah, we're really evangelizing
Hmm.
because you've been through the marketplace journey, you've built it from the ground up. It is challenging. And so, what I would do is put a call out to everybody who has that marketplace idea. Don't build the infrastructure. Like when you're building a house, you don't care about the plumbing, you don't care about the
Mm,
foundation. What you generally care about is the exterior, right? The facade that people see every day, the number of bedrooms, right? What those appointments are in those bedrooms. I would argue that Nautical provides that foundation that you don't have to worry about, right? Connecting up the payment providers, connecting up the marketing platforms like Klaviyo and Mailchimp, right? That's all commoditized. Focus on the buyer experience, right? Operationalize getting vendors on, curate the right experience. That's what marketplace operators really should focus on. It's funny because, if you talk to investors and you went in front of them and said, hey, I'm going to launch the next Toys R Us. And by the way, I'm going to take $5 million of your money and I'm going to build a new commerce platform. They'd say, wait, why would you do that? You just go get Magento or go get Shopify
hmm
or go get BigCommerce. Why would you do that? Well, right now, there's no good options with a marketplace. And that's what marketplace providers or operators do right now is they go to YC or they go to these big VC firms and they say, hey, I need $5 million because I've got to spend 2 years building a marketplace platform before I even validate my business model.
Yeah.
you know, and most investors would tell that Toys R Us, who's trying to create, Shopify and not productize it, of course, no, go fly a kite. We might back the operational part of the business, but we are not going to back you trying to be a tech company. And so, I would hope that, that message gets out to, not only founders, but also investors that, there is a platform for folks to validate their business model very quickly. And, there is still IP to be had, intellectual property, in the buyer experience, right? And the workflow orchestration. But the engine, the marketplace engine is a commodity.
Mm.
And, I'd encourage folks to look at Nautical as an enabling or a marketplace infrastructure enablement play for them.
Keep crushing it, man. I love what you're doing, and hope you have it back on someday.
Awesome. Excellent, Mike.
Take care, Ryan.
Thank you.